A schoolteacher vanished on a Friday night in October 1994, and the man who knew exactly what happened drove home, poured himself a drink, and waited for the knock at the door that never came. For 19 years. Her green Honda Civic sat idling on a back road 3 miles from Cedarville Elementary, driver's door open, headlights cutting a pale stripe into the dark. She was simply gone. The case went nowhere. Then, in the spring of 2013, a woman named Cheryl Fain bought the old Hollis house at a county bank auction, climbed a pull-down ladder into the low-ceilinged attic, and found a plastic Piggly Wiggly bag wedged behind a roll of pink insulation. Inside it was a motel receipt. 1 page. Dated October 14th, 1994, a piece of paper that had been waiting in the dark for 19 years, holding the single fact that would destroy a lie that had gone unchallenged long enough to nearly become permanent truth. But before we get to that attic, we have to go back to Cedarville. Because to understand what that receipt meant, you first have to understand who Nora Jean Hollis was. Cedarville, Arkansas sits in the far northwest corner of the state, tucked into the Boston Mountains, population 842. In October of 1994, the dogwood trees along Main Street had gone red. The air smelled of wood smoke and fallen leaves. And on Friday nights, most of the town was either at the high school football game or sitting on a front porch listening to it on the radio. Cedarville was the kind of place where the Piggly Wiggly checkout ladies knew your order before you put it on the belt, where people left their doors unlocked and let their children walk to the library alone, where trust was something you did not think twice about because you had never had a reason to. Nora Jean Hollis had grown up 1 county over, in Alma, and moved to Cedarville in 1983 when she took a first-grade teaching position at the elementary school. She was 31 then, dark-haired and quick with a laugh, the kind of teacher who kept a candy jar on her desk only on Fridays and remembered every child's birthday without writing it down. She had married Dale Hollis in 1979, a quiet man who worked inventory management for a lumber supplier in Fort Smith. And by 1994, they had a daughter, Amy, who was 14 and played flute in the middle school band. By her 11th year teaching at Cedarville Elementary, Nora had become something close to an institution. Parents requested her classroom specifically. Former students came back to visit. Her room smelled of dry erase markers and the cinnamon apple candle she kept burning on the windowsill from September through December. She coached the school's reading bowl team on Tuesday afternoons. She drove a green Honda Civic she called Clover and complained that the tape deck ate every third cassette. She kept a photograph of Amy on her desk beside the candy jar, updated every school year. On the morning of Friday, October 14th, 1994, Nora Hollis, dressed in a burgundy sweater and khaki pants, kissed Amy goodbye. Amy later remembered this specifically because her mother kissed her on the forehead rather than the cheek and drove to school for parent-teacher conferences. That evening, she had 22 appointments scheduled between 4 and 7:30. She got through all of them. The last parent out the door, Roger Tatum, father of a boy named Cody, told investigators she walked him to his truck and waved from the parking lot. He noted the time, 7:43. It was the last time anyone outside this story would ever see Nora Hollis. At 8:15, her classroom was dark and locked. At 8:32, her green Honda Civic was found on Gentry Mill Road, a gravel county route that wound behind the grain elevators south of town. The engine was running. The driver's door was open. Her purse was on the passenger seat. Her keys were in the ignition. The car's headlights were on, casting a tunnel of pale light down an empty road. Her gradebook was on the back seat. Her coffee thermos sat in the cup holder, still warm. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no skid marks, No footprints in the loose gravel that told investigators anything useful. Nora Hollis was gone. Simply, completely gone. Crawford County Sheriff's Deputy Frank Autry was the first to respond to the scene at 8:41. He described it as something he had never seen before and never wanted to see again. A car abandoned mid-road like someone had vanished at the wheel. At 9:15, when Autry radioed the station with the details, it was Dale Hollis who answered the phone at home. He said he had not heard from Nora since that morning. He said he had been in Fort Smith all day and had dinner with colleagues at the Holiday Inn on Rogers Avenue that evening. He sounded, by Deputy Autry's account, worried. He came to the scene within 40 minutes, looked at the car, and stood with his hands in his pockets, and said nothing. A search party assembled the following morning before dawn. Volunteers, most of the town it seemed, walked a 2-mile radius from the abandoned car through creek beds and pastureland and the edge of the National Forest. The Crawford County Sheriff's Office brought in a tracking dog. By the third day, they had found nothing. By the end of the first week, nothing. Nora Jean Hollis had left behind her car, her purse, her keys, and her daughter, and gone somewhere that an entire community of people who loved her could not follow. The investigation fell to Detective Sergeant Dennis Farrow, a 22-year veteran of the Crawford County Sheriff's Office who had spent most of his career on property crimes and had worked 3 homicide investigations in his entire tenure. He was methodical, thorough, and by his own later admission, initially working from the wrong assumption. In a 1997 interview with the Fort Smith Southwest Times Record, Farrow acknowledged that his early instinct was that Nora Hollis had left voluntarily, a troubled marriage, a planned departure. It was a conclusion he described as the worst professional mistake of his life. Dale Hollis had an alibi that checked out. Partially, 3 co-workers placed him at the Holiday Inn dinner in Fort Smith until approximately 9:30 p.m. The restaurant tab, paid on the lumber company's account, showed a group of 4 with a check closed at 9:14. The drive from Fort Smith to Cedarville ran approximately 40 minutes. The timing was imperfect, but not impossible. Farrow pressed, and Dale held. The co-workers were consistent. The credit card records confirmed the dinner. He had no physical evidence to break through it. One early lead that should have gone further involved a neighbor, Roy Pinson, who lived 3 houses down on Mill Creek Road. Pinson told investigators he had seen Dale's truck pulling out of the Hollis driveway at 5:45 that Friday afternoon, well before the Fort Smith dinner would have ended. When Farrow circled back, Pinson softened the statement. He wasn't sure of the time. Might have been Saturday. He was sorry. It went nowhere. Meanwhile, Amy Hollis was living with her maternal grandmother. She stopped playing flute. She watched her mother's colleagues at the elementary school become her substitute caretakers. She kept a photograph of Nora in the front pocket of her backpack and said very little to adults who asked how she was doing. She was 14 years old, and someone had taken her mother and the people assigned to find out who were running out of leads. By the spring of 1996, the investigation had stalled entirely. Farrow retired that summer. The case was transferred, then transferred again, and eventually filed into the county cold case system, which was, in practice, a metal filing cabinet in a storage room adjacent to the break room at the Crawford County Sheriff's Office. The years accumulated the way they do in cases like this, quietly, relentlessly, without mercy. By 1999, 5 years after Nora's disappearance, Amy Hollis had graduated high school and moved to Fayetteville to study education at the University of Arkansas. She told friends she was going to be a teacher. She did not say why, but anyone who had known Nora understood. Dale Hollis had quietly sold the house on Mill Creek Road in 1998. and moved to Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. He remarried in 2002. A woman named Patricia, who worked in hospital administration and knew nothing about Cedarville or what had happened there. The reward poster that Nora's colleagues had hung in the window of the Cedarville Piggly Wiggly in October 1994 stayed up long past the point where the ink had faded to a pale pink and the edges had curled from the heat of the window glass. The woman who ran the register never took it down. She told a reporter later she wasn't sure she had the right. The detective who had taken over the case after Farrow's retirement, a younger investigator named Carl Simmons, left the department in 2003 for a private security job in Little Rock. He kept a photocopy of the Hollis case file in a box in his home office. Not because he had any leads, because he could not make himself throw it away. In 2007, Amy Hollis, now 27, teaching second grade in Springdale, filed a formal request with the Crawford County Sheriff's Office to have her mother's case reviewed. She was told the case remained open and active. She asked for specifics. She received a form letter. She filed again in 2009. Same response. Her mother had been missing for 15 years. The active file had not been meaningfully touched in nearly a decade. Every case on this channel represents weeks of research, verifying facts, and piecing together real lives that deserved better. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind stories like this one, take a second to like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, let's get back to Nora. Then, in March of 2013, something happened that no one had anticipated. Dale Hollis, living in Broken Arrow, defaulted on a home equity loan he had retained on the Cedarville property through a seller-financed arrangement that had lapsed. The bank foreclosed. The house went to auction. A woman from Van Buren named Cheryl Fain, who had been looking for a rental property, bought it for $62,000 and drove out to see what needed to be done. Cheryl Fain described the attic the way most people describe attics: low, hot, dusty, and full of other people's abandoned past. Cardboard boxes gone soft from humidity. Old furniture draped in moving blankets. A child's bicycle frame with no wheels. She had been up there about 20 minutes when she noticed that a section of the pink insulation on the south wall had been disturbed, pulled out and shoved back unevenly, the way someone had done it deliberately and in a hurry. She pulled it back. And there, in the gap between the roll and the exterior wall, was a white plastic Piggly Wiggly grocery bag, tied in a knot. She untied it. Inside was a single folded piece of paper, a motel receipt. The Creekside Lodge, Waldron, Arkansas, Room 7. Check-in 6:47 p.m. Check-out 1:14 a.m. Dated October 14, 1994. Name on the receipt: D. Hollis. Payment: cash. Cheryl Fain set it down carefully on a nearby box. She climbed down from the attic and called the Crawford County Sheriff's Office. The investigator who took the call that afternoon was a 34-year-old detective named Gina Marsh, who had joined the department in 2008 and had never worked the Hollis case. But she knew the name. Everyone in Crawford County law enforcement knew the name. She pulled the file the same afternoon. The Holiday Inn dinner in Fort Smith had ended at 9:14 p.m. The drive from Waldron, Arkansas, where the Creekside Lodge sat on Route 71, to Gentry Mill Road in Cedarville was 43 minutes. Dale Hollis could not have been at a dinner in Fort Smith at 9:14 and also checked into a motel in Waldron at 6:47. The alibi that had held for 19 years wasn't cracked. It was gone. Marsh contacted the Arkansas State Police Cold Case Unit that same week. The receipt was processed for physical evidence. Fingerprints were lifted from the surface. 2 were identified as belonging to Dale Hollis. His right thumb matched to prints on file from a 1989 employment background check. The Creekside Lodge still existed under different ownership, but the new owner had digitized the old paper reservation logs. Records confirmed the registration. Room 7, one night, cash, October 14, 1994. The receipt was real. It had always been real. He had kept it for 19 years instead of destroying it, and that single fact, inexplicable and human, had undone him. Dale Hollis was located in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma in April 2013. He was 61 years old, gray-haired, working part-time at a home improvement store. He coached youth baseball on Saturday mornings. He had a stepdaughter who called him Dad. When Detectives Marsh and State Police investigator Ray Hendricks knocked on his door and showed him the receipt, he looked at it for a long moment, said he didn't know what they were talking about, said he had never been to Waldron, asked for a lawyer. But the receipt had opened something that 19 years of closed doors had not. With the alibi dismantled, investigators returned to the physical evidence from the original 1994 investigation. The interior of the Honda Civic had been swabbed in the initial sweep, but never comprehensively DNA tested. The technology available in 1994 was limited and expensive, and the case had been classified as a possible voluntary disappearance before full forensic processing was authorized. Those samples, cotton swabs from the trunk's interior carpet, had sat in a sealed evidence envelope in the Crawford County storage room for 19 years. They were now submitted to the Arkansas State Crime Lab for full analysis. The results came back in August 2013. Biological material recovered from the trunk lining matched Nora Jean Hollis. She had been in the trunk of her own car. Then, Roy Pinson called. Roy Pinson was 67 now, retired, living in the same house on Mill Creek Road, where he had spent his entire adult life. He was the neighbor who had told investigators in 1994 that he had seen Dale's truck pulling out of the driveway on the afternoon of October 14th, and then softened his statement when pressed. He told Detective Marsh that he had backed down because Dale Hollis had come to his door 2 days after Nora disappeared, and told him, calmly, pleasantly, that Roy had probably misremembered what he saw, that it would cause confusion if Roy said the wrong things to the investigators, that the family was going through a very hard time and didn't need complications. Roy Pinson said he had spent 19 years telling himself he had done the right thing. He said he had not. He had seen Dale Hollis's truck pull out of that driveway at 5:40 in the afternoon on October 14, 1994. He was certain of it, because his wife had asked who was driving so fast, and he had told her it was the man from down the road. He had been certain of it for 19 years. Dale Hollis was arrested on October 9, 2014, 20 years and 5 days after Nora John Hollis vanished from a parking lot in Cedarville, Arkansas. He was extradited to Crawford County and charged with first-degree murder. The newspapers ran the story across 3 states. People who had spent 2 decades carrying a quiet image of Dale Hollis in their minds. A private, unremarkable man who had simply lost his wife to something unknowable, rearranged everything they thought they knew about the quiet ones, about the ones who wait, about what a person can hide behind a normal face for 2 decades if a community trusts them enough not to look. In March 2016, Dale Hollis pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a 35-year sentence, making him eligible for parole at age 96. He made no statement. He looked at the table during the proceeding. He did not look at Amy. Amy Hollis stood in the Crawford County courtroom on the day of the plea and read her victim impact statement in a steady voice. She was 36 years old. She had been a second-grade teacher in Springdale for 9 years. She had a daughter of her own, a girl named May, who was 3 years old. Amy said that her mother had kissed her on the forehead on the last morning of her life, and that she had thought about that forehead kiss on every important day since. Every graduation, every report card she brought home, every first day of school, every morning she brushed May's hair before daycare. She said the worst thing about 20 years of silence had not been the grief. It was that the silence had made her mother feel like a story that ended without ending, like something that simply stopped. She said finding out the truth, even a truth this terrible, had given her mother back in some way she could not fully explain. It had made the story real again. It had made Nora Hollis real again. A woman who had lived a real life, who had been taken from it by a real person, and who deserved to have that, said plainly in a room full of witnesses. Nora Jean Hollis was 41 years old in October 1994. She taught first grade at Cedarville Elementary for 11 years. She kept a cinnamon apple candle on her classroom windowsill and a photograph of Amy on her desk. She remembered every child's birthday without writing it down. She drove a green Honda Civic she called Clover. She kissed her daughter on the forehead on the last morning they had together. A receipt, folded and hidden in an attic, held the truth for 19 years. What it tells us, beyond the facts of this particular case, is that evidence does not decay the way memory does. Paper and fingerprints and preserved biological material sit in the dark, patient, waiting. The truth was always there. It just needed someone to pull back the insulation and look. The case led directly to Crawford County's decision to digitize and comprehensively audit all physical evidence from open cold case files in their storage system. A project completed in 2017 that has since been cited as a potential model for rural Arkansas law enforcement. What does it mean that a man could commit this crime, construct a false alibi, and live undisturbed for 2 decades while his victim's daughter was filing formal requests to have the case reopened? What responsibility do institutions bear when cases this important go unexamined for years at a time? When a filing cabinet in a break room becomes the entire weight of justice? And what do we owe the people like Amy Hollis, who spent half their lives waiting for an answer that was sitting in an attic the whole time? Justice found Nora Jean Hollis after 20 years. Stories like hers are why this channel exists. If you believe that truth is worth pursuing, no matter how long it takes, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More solved cold cases are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.